Welcome to the village of Eternal Mist. Once you enter, the fog remembers your name. Some say the village is empty. Others swear they still hear the bells. Subscribe. If you're brave enough to stay, Layla yanked on the rope. Pull me up now! The forgotten road. The sky was laden with dark grey clouds when the old sedan began climbing the sharp switchbacks of the mountain road. Youssef, a journalist in his 30s who had dedicated his life to uncovering forgotten stories, gripped the steering wheel tightly as the car swayed on the narrow path riddled with gravel and potholes. Beside him sat Layla, a photographer with long black hair, staring out the window at the precipitous abyss extending alongside the road. She snapped photos intermittently, but her face was paler than usual. "Are you sure about this place?" Layla asked, her voice betraying anxiety. "The map says we veered off the last paved road 2 hours ago." Youssef smiled confidently, though his heart was racing. "The village exists." The old man at the cafe was very clear. The village of Al-Duha preserved in time, unvisited for decades. In the back seat, Karim, a folklore researcher in his 40s, with greying temples and thick-rimmed glasses, was buried in an ancient leather-bound journal. He had been the one to suggest this expedition after discovering cryptic references to the village in Ottoman-era archives. According to these records, Karim said without looking up, the village was abandoned in 1923, but the strange thing is, the census records show 347 residents, yet when the government sent investigators in 1924, they found only empty houses. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no explanations. "People don't just vanish," Layla muttered, adjusting her camera lens nervously. "Don't they?" Karim raised his eyebrows. "History is full of such mysteries. The Roanoke colony, the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers, the Inuit village of Anjikuni, those are legends," Youssef interjected, maneuvering around a particularly treacherous curve. "We're here to find the truth, not chase ghost stories." But even as he spoke, a chill ran down his spine. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and something else had changed. The mist. It appeared suddenly, rolling down the mountainside like a living thing, thick, white, and impenetrable. Within moments, visibility dropped to mere meters. Youssef slowed the car to a crawl, his knuckles white on the wheel. "This isn't natural," Layla whispered, her camera forgotten in her lap. "Mist doesn't move like this." The fog seemed to pulse around them, pressing against the windows as if trying to get in. Through the windshield, the road ahead disappeared into a wall of white, yet Youssef kept driving, guided more by instinct than sight, following the barely visible tire tracks that suggested someone or something had traveled this way before. Hours seemed to pass. Though the dashboard clock showed only 20 minutes, the silence inside the car grew oppressive, broken only by the engine's labored breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Then, without warning, the mist parted. First glimpse, what lay before them defied logic and reason. The village materialized from the fog like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Stone houses with slate roofs emerged one by one, arranged in concentric circles around a central square. Everything was grey, the stones, the roofs, even the wooden doors that hung at odd angles. No lights shone from any window. No smoke rose from any chimney, but it was the mist that truly disturbed them. It surrounded the village in a perfect circle, rising like walls to an impossible height, yet stopping precisely at the village boundaries. Within this circle the air was clear, though heavy with an unsettling stillness. "Dear God," Karim breathed, removing his glasses to clean them, as if doubting what he saw. Youssef stopped the car at the village entrance, where a weathered wooden sign dangled from a rusted post. The Arabic letters were faded but readable. Al-Duha, population 347. "That sign hasn't been changed since 1923, Karim noted, consulting his journal. "The population number matches exactly." They sat in silence, staring at the abandoned village. No wind stirred. No birds sang. The only sound was their own breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. "We should set up base camp before dark," Youssef finally said, trying to inject normalcy into his voice. "According to the sun's position, we have maybe 3 hours of daylight left." "Can you even see the sun?" Layla asked, pointing upward. Indeed, though the air within the village circle was clear, the sky above was a uniform grey, as if the mist had formed a dome overhead. They exited the car cautiously, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the stone-paved street. The temperature was cold, but not unbearably so, perhaps 10 degrees Celsius. despite it being late September when the weather should have been warmer at lower elevations. As they gathered their equipment, tents, cameras, recording devices, and supplies, Layla suddenly grabbed Yousef's arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing to one of the houses. In a second-floor window, a curtain swayed gently. But there was no breeze, the village square. They decided to explore before setting up camp, drawn irresistibly toward the village center. The houses on either side of the narrow street loomed over them, their windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. Many doors stood ajar, darkness pooling within. Yousef pushed open one door which creaked on rusted hinges. Inside, the house was frozen in time. A table was set for dinner, plates, cups, and utensils neatly arranged. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise it looked as if the occupants had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. "This is impossible," Layla said, photographing the scene. "Decades of weather should have destroyed this. Wood should rot, fabric should decay, and yet—" She ran her finger along a chair back. "It's all preserved like a museum display." Karim was examining the walls, where family photographs hung in tarnished frames. "Look at their faces," he said quietly. The photographs showed typical family scenes, weddings, children playing, group portraits. But something was wrong with every image. The faces were blurred, not from age or damage, but as if the subjects had moved at the moment of exposure. Yet their bodies remained perfectly still. Every single photograph, Karim continued, moving from frame to frame. Hundreds of people, and we can't see a single face clearly. They moved through several more houses, finding similar scenes. Life interrupted but not destroyed. In one home, a child's toy sat on the floor, a wooden horse on wheels. In another, a book lay open on a reading chair, the pages yellowed but readable. The text was Arabic poetry, and the passage visible spoke of shadows and doorways and things that lived between worlds. The village square, when they finally reached it, was the most unsettling sight yet. It was a large cobblestone plaza, perhaps 50 meters across, with a dried-up fountain at its center. But surrounding the fountain were statues, dozens of them arranged in a perfect circle. They were human-sized figures, carved from the same grey stone as the buildings, and they all faced inward toward the fountain. "These aren't statues," Layla said, her voice trembling as she examined them through her camera lens. "Look at the detail. The clothing, the expressions. These are too lifelike." She was right. Each figure wore distinct clothing from the 1920s era, traditional robes, Western-style suits, children's dresses. Their faces showed expressions of terror, mouths open in silent screams, hands raised as if warding off something. Karim approached one of the figures, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch it. The surface was cold and smooth, but there was something else. "Feel this," he said. Yousef placed his palm on the stone figure's arm. It was cold, yes, but beneath the surface he could swear he felt a pulse. Slow, faint, but rhythmic. He jerked his hand back. "It's just our imagination," he said, not believing his own words. "Stone can't have a pulse, can't it?" Karim gestured around them. "Can mist form perfect circles? Can houses remain pristine after a century of abandonment? Can an entire population vanish without a trace? We're beyond what can and can't happen." As if in response to his words, a sound drifted across the square. It was faint at first, then grew clearer. A child's laughter, high and sweet, coming from somewhere in the maze of streets beyond the plaza. They froze, listening. The laughter echoed off the stone walls, making it impossible to pinpoint its direction. Then it stopped, cut off abruptly, leaving a silence more oppressive than before. "We need to document this systematically," Yousef said, fighting to maintain his professional composure. "Layla, start photographing everything. Karim, make notes of anything unusual in the architecture or layout. I'll set up the recording equipment." But Layla wasn't listening. She was staring at the fountain, her face drained of color. "Yousef," she whispered. "The fountain." He turned to look. The fountain, which had been dry moments ago, was now filled with dark liquid. It wasn't water, too thick, too dark. As they watched, it began to overflow, trickling down the sides of the basin onto the cobblestones. Karim knelt beside the spreading liquid, careful not to touch it. "This is blood," he said, his voice hollow. "Fresh blood." The first night, they retreated to set up camp in the village square, reasoning that the open space was safer than the claustrophobic streets. As they worked, the grey light that passed for daylight began to fade, though it was impossible to tell if the sun was actually setting or if the mist was simply growing darker. Their tents formed a small triangle around a camping lantern. They'd brought enough supplies for a week, though Yusef was already questioning the wisdom of staying even one night. But they couldn't leave, not yet. The journalist in him knew this was the story of a lifetime, and the rational part of his mind kept insisting there had to be a logical explanation for everything they'd witnessed. As darkness fell completely, the village transformed. The mist beyond the village circle began to glow with a faint phosphorescence, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The effect was beautiful and terrifying. They were trapped in a bubble of light surrounded by breathing walls of luminescent fog. "We should take shifts keeping watch," Karim suggested, his earlier academic enthusiasm replaced by naked fear. "I don't think any of us will sleep anyway, but we shouldn't all be vulnerable at once." They agreed. Yusef would take the first watch, then Layla, then Karim. They ate a cold dinner of canned food, no one wanting to risk starting a fire, though they couldn't have explained why. As the others settled into their tents, Yusef sat on a folding chair near the fountain, which had mysteriously dried again, leaving no trace of the blood they'd seen. He had his laptop open, trying to type up notes of the day's observations, but found his hands shaking too badly to manage more than a few sentences. The silence was absolute. No insects chirped, no wind rustled, no distant animals called. It was the silence of a tomb. Then, at precisely midnight by his watch, the sounds began. At first it was subtle, a whisper of movement from the streets surrounding the square. Footsteps, light and quick as if children were running through the alleys. Then came voices, muffled and indistinct, speaking in Arabic but too distant to make out words. Yusef stood, his heart hammering. "Who's there?" he called out, immediately feeling foolish. His voice sounded flat, absorbed by the oppressive air. The footsteps grew closer. He could hear them now from multiple directions, converging on the square. But he could see nothing in the darkness beyond the range of his lantern. A figure emerged from one of the side streets. It was a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, dressed in clothes from another era. A little girl in a simple dress, her hair in braids. She stood at the edge of the square, her face cast in shadow, unmoving. "Hello?" Yusef called, taking a cautious step forward. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The girl didn't respond. She simply stood there, and now Yusef could see that her feet weren't quite touching the ground. She floated perhaps an inch above the cobblestones. More figures emerged. A woman in a traditional robe, an old man with a cane, a young couple holding hands. One by one they materialized from the darkness, forming a circle around the square. Dozens of them, hundreds. They all had one thing in common. Their faces were blurred, just like in the photographs. Yusef stumbled backward, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. "Layla, Karim," he shouted. His companions burst from their tents. Layla had her camera up instantly, clicking frantically. Karim stood frozen, his journal clutched to his chest. The spectral figures began to move, gliding rather than walking, slowly converging on the center of the square, where the 3 living humans huddled together. As they drew closer, Yusef could hear them speaking now, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of whispers. "Why have you come? Leave this place where you cannot help us. Join us. Join us. Join us." The figures reached the edge of their camp, and Layla's camera suddenly sparked and died. The laptop shut down without warning. Even their flashlights flickered and went dark. Only the camping lantern remained lit, its light growing dimmer by the second. In the fading glow, Yusef could finally see the faces of the figures. Or rather, where their faces should have been. Each one had smooth, blank skin, features erased as if wiped clean by an unseen hand. Yet they continued to speak, their mouths unmoving. "You shouldn't have come to Al-Duha. The mist protects us. The mist preserves us. The mist hungers." The closest figure, the little girl, reached out a translucent hand toward Yusef. Her touch was ice-cold, passing through his arm like freezing water. Where her hand passed through him, he saw a flash of memory that wasn't his own. The village on a market day, bustling with life. The sun shining, children playing. Then the mist rolling down from the mountain, unnatural and swift. People screaming, running for their homes. The mist seeping under doors, through windows, touching everyone it reached. Bodies freezing mid-step, skin turning to stone, minds trapped between life and death. Youssef gasped and pulled away, the vision breaking. The girl withdrew her hand and tilted her head as if curious. "You see," she said, her voice that of a child but ancient beyond measure. "You see what happened to us. The bargain. The price. The eternal preservation. What bargain?" Karim managed to croak. "Who did you bargain with?" The figures all pointed simultaneously toward the dried fountain. In the dying light of the lantern, they could see that the bottom of the fountain wasn't stone at all, but something else. A darkness that writhed and pulsed, deeper than should be possible, as if the fountain were a doorway to some vast emptiness. The keeper of the threshold, the faceless crowd whispered in unison. The one who waits between. The devourer of days. The lantern flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the absolute darkness, the whispers grew to a roar. Hands, cold, insubstantial, but somehow solid enough to grip, seized them. Youssef felt himself being dragged toward the fountain, toward that impossible darkness. He screamed, fighting against the phantom grips, and heard Layla and Karim screaming too. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The lantern flared back to life. The figures were gone. They were alone in the square, collapsed on the cobblestones, gasping for breath. Youssef looked at his arm where the girl had touched him. His skin was pale, almost grey, and when he touched it, it felt cold and hard, like stone beginning to form. The journal, none of them slept the rest of that night. They huddled in one tent, the camping lantern turned up to its maximum brightness, jumping at every shadow and sound. When grey dawn finally filtered through the mist dome above them, it felt like a reprieve, though they all knew it was temporary. "We need to leave," Layla said, her voice hoarse. "Now, whatever this place is, we can't stay here." But Youssef was staring at his arm. The strange, stone-like texture had faded with the daylight, his skin returning to normal. "We're trapped," he said quietly. "You saw the mist. It goes up forever. And I don't think we could find the road out even if we tried." "Then we find another way," Karim insisted. "There has to be an explanation, a way to break whatever curse or phenomenon this is." "Did you see what I saw?" Youssef asked them. "When that girl touched me, the vision of what happened here." They hadn't, and Youssef described the scene, the sudden arrival of the mist, the transformation of the villagers. They called something the keeper of the threshold, that thing in the fountain. Karim's hands trembled as he opened his journal. The archives mentioned something. "I thought it was just local superstition at the time." He flipped through pages. "Here, a legend from the Ottoman period. It speaks of ancient places in the mountains, doorways to the space between moments, places where time doesn't flow normally, where the boundaries between life and death grow thin." "And the villagers?" Layla asked. "There was a drought, a terrible one in the early 1920s. The village was dying. According to one fragmentary account, the village elder made contact with something, an entity that offered a bargain, eternal preservation in exchange for eternal service. The village would never decay, never die, but it would also never live. Trapped in the moment between, feeding the entity with their stolen time." "That's insane," Layla protested. "We're talking about ghost stories and demons. There has to be a scientific explanation. Mass hallucination. Maybe gas from underground deposits affecting our brains." "Gas doesn't turn people into stone statues," Youssef interrupted, showing his arm again. "I felt it happening. Whatever is in that fountain, it's real." They decided to search the village systematically, looking for any information about how previous visitors might have escaped, if there had been any. Surely they weren't the first to stumble upon this place in a century. The houses yielded few clues at first. Most were exactly as they'd found them the previous day, frozen in time, perfectly preserved, waiting for occupants who would never return. But in what appeared to be the village and elder's house, a larger structure near the square with ornate wooden doors, they found something that changed everything. It was a journal, hidden in a locked drawer that Karim managed to force open. The leather was cracked but intact, the pages yellowed but readable. The writing was in Arabic, dated 1923. Karim read aloud, translating as he went, June 15th, 1923. "The drought continues. The wells are dry. Crops have failed for the third year. Children are dying. The government sends no aid. We are forgotten by the world, left to fade away in these cursed mountains. June 28, 1923. Old Mahmud claims to have found something in the caves above the village. A door, he says, carved with symbols he cannot read. Behind it, he heard voices speaking in no earthly language. He is mad with thirst and hunger, surely. Yet others have heard them too. July 5, 1923. I am the village elder. The responsibility falls to me. Tonight I will go to the cave. I will speak to whatever lies beyond that door. I will offer anything for my people's salvation. July 6, 1923, it answered. Dear God, it answered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It showed me visions of eternity, of preservation, of a village that would never die. All it asks in return is time, our time. Every moment we would have lived, given freely. We would exist in the space between seconds, neither alive nor dead, serving as guardians of the threshold. I told it we would consider. July 10, 1923. I have called a meeting. I have presented the choice to the village. Continue as we are and die slowly of starvation, or accept the bargain and live forever in a fashion. The vote was unanimous. We are desperate. We are afraid. God forgive us, we said yes. July 12, 1923. Tomorrow it comes. The entity will arrive with the dawn mist. We must all be in the square. We must all accept the transformation willingly. Only then will the bargain be sealed. I have done what I thought best for my people. I pray I have not damned us all. July 13, 1923. The mist came. It was beautiful and terrible. As it touched each of us, I felt my life being drawn out like thread from a spool, spooling into the darkness beneath the fountain. I felt time stopping, my body becoming stone, my mind fragmenting across 1,000 moments simultaneously. I am writing this from memory that is not memory, in a present that is not present. We are neither alive nor dead. We are preserved as promised. But at what cost? I cannot scream though I want to. I cannot weep though I long to. I can only watch as centuries pass in the world beyond the mist, while we remain frozen, feeding our stolen time to the thing we were foolish enough to summon. If anyone finds this journal, run. Do not try to help us. Do not try to understand. Just run before the night falls and we come for you. The entity is always hungry. It wants more time, more lives, more souls trapped in the space between. Run, while you still can. The journal ended there. Karim's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. At least now we know what we're dealing with, Yusef said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Do we? Layla countered. We know there's some kind of entity that feeds on time, that trapped these people in a state between life and death. But how does that help us escape? Before anyone could answer, they heard it, a sound like the tolling of a great bell, deep and resonant, coming from somewhere above them. They rushed outside and looked up. The mist dome overhead was darkening, though it couldn't have been later than mid-morning. The glow from the mist walls intensified, pulsing faster now, almost urgently, and from every house, every doorway, every window, the faceless figures began to emerge. More than they'd seen the previous night. Hundreds upon hundreds filling the streets, drifting toward the square. It's not night, Layla whispered in horror. It's not supposed to happen during the day. Karim clutched the journal. The entity is impatient. We've learned too much. It wants us now. They ran back to their camp, but their supplies were gone. The tents had collapsed into piles of rotted fabric, as if decades had passed in mere hours. The car, parked at the village entrance, was now visible even from the square, a rusted hulk, tires flat, paint peeling, as if it had been abandoned for a century. It's accelerating time around our belongings, Karim said, understanding dawning with horror. Decaying them while preserving us. It's preparing us for the transformation. The faceless crowd drew closer, their whispers rising like a tide. Join us. Stay forever. Feed the threshold. Give your time. Yusef grabbed his companion's arms. The cave, he said urgently. The journal mentioned caves above the village. If that's where the door is, where the entity came from, maybe that's where we can find a way to stop it. It was a desperate plan, with no guarantee of success. But it was the only plan they had. The street leading out of the village square spiraled upward, carved into the mountainside like a stone ribbon. Yusef, Layla and Karim sprinted up the ancient path, their lungs burning in the thin mountain air, while behind them the mass of faceless figures glided in eerie pursuit. The specters didn't run, they didn't need to. They moved with the inevitability of a rising tide, patient and relentless. "There," Karim shouted, pointing ahead with a trembling finger. At the edge of the village, where the last stone house crumbled into the raw mountainside, a narrow trail cut through the rocks. It was barely more than a goat path, treacherous and steep, disappearing into a crevice in the cliff face. They scrambled onto the trail, just as the first of the faceless figures reached out for them. Youssef felt cold fingers brush his ankle, and that same terrible coldness began to spread up his leg. He kicked frantically and pulled free, feeling his shoe slip off in the process. The path climbed sharply, forcing them to use their hands to pull themselves up over boulders and around blind corners. The mist pressed close here, not glowing as it did around the village, but darker, heavier, almost suffocating. Layla slipped on loose stones and Youssef grabbed her arm, hauling her back from the edge of a drop that disappeared into fog-shrouded nothingness. For a moment, they clung to each other and the rock face, hearts pounding. Below them, the faceless crowd had stopped at the village boundary. They stood in a silent line, hundreds of blurred figures staring upward with eyes they no longer possessed. But they didn't need to follow. Their whispers carried on the wind. "You cannot escape. All paths lead back. The keeper sees you." The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a dark gash in the grey stone. It was wider than Youssef had expected, tall enough to stand upright in, and about 3 meters across. Ancient symbols were carved around the entrance, worn smooth by weather and time, but still visible. They were unlike any writing system Karim had seen in his years of research. "These aren't Arabic or Aramaic or any known language," Karim murmured, running his fingers over the carved grooves. "They're older, much older." They had no choice but to enter. Behind them the mist was gathering, coiling like a living thing, and within it darker shapes moved, not the village ghosts, but something else. Something that had never been human. Inside the cave the temperature dropped dramatically. Their breath misted in the air, and frost sparkled on the stone walls. The passage led downward at first, then leveled out, widening into a series of natural chambers. The walls here bore more symbols, painted rather than carved, using pigments that glowed faintly with their own light phosphorescent blues and greens and sickly yellows. Layla, professional instincts overwhelming her fear, pulled out her backup camera, a small analog one she'd brought as a nostalgic touch. Unlike her digital equipment, it still worked. She began photographing the symbols, the flash creating stark shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "Look at this," Karim said, stopping before a large panel of paintings. The images told a story. The first panel showed the mountain as it must have looked thousands of years ago, pristine and sacred. The second showed figures, ancient peoples, performing some kind of ritual around what appeared to be a natural well or pit in the cave floor. The third panel showed something emerging from that pit. The artist had painted it as a mass of darkness with countless writhing appendages, covered in what might have been eyes or mouths or both. The people in the painting were fleeing in terror. The fourth panel showed the figures sealing the pit with stones, covering it with symbols of warding and protection. The fifth and final panel showed the passage of time represented by suns and moons cycling over here, and then showed the seals breaking, the darkness emerging once more. And at the edge of the painting, modern figures, their features indistinct, but their clothing clearly from the 1920s, the villagers of Al-Duha. "They didn't summon it," Karim breathed. "They accidentally freed it. The drought, the digging for water, they must have broken the ancient seals, which means there was a way to seal it before," Youssef said. "Maybe there's a way to seal it again." A sound echoed through the caves, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself. It wasn't quite a sound, more a feeling transmitted through the rock, through their bones, directly into their minds. It was a voice, ancient and vast and utterly inhuman. "You seek to imprison me again? How amusing. The old ones managed it only because I was weak. Newly birthed into your realm, I am strong now. Fed on a century of stolen time. Grown fat on suspended moments. I am the threshold, I am the space between. I am what dwells in the gaps of existence." The voice wasn't sound but pressure, reality bending to accommodate its words. Their vision blurred, and for a moment they could see past the walls of the cave, through the mountain itself, down to where the entity truly lived. It was vast beyond comprehension. The fountain in the village square was merely a hole, a feeding tube, the smallest portion of its body that could squeeze through into their world. The true mass of it existed in some other space, a dimension adjacent to their own, visible only in fragments and glimpses. It was ancient when the mountains were young, patient in a way that mortal minds couldn't fathom, and it was very, very hungry. The vision ended, leaving them gasping and disoriented. "Keep moving," Layla managed to say. "There has to be something here. A weakness. A way to fight it." They pressed deeper into the caves, following passages that spiraled downward and inward, always toward the heart of the mountain. The symbols on the walls grew more frantic, more desperate, as if the ancient artists had been racing against time to complete their warnings. Then they found the chamber. It was enormous, a natural cathedral carved by water over millions of years. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like teeth, and stalagmites rose from the floor like broken bones. In the center of the chamber was the pit the paintings had depicted, a perfectly circular hole, perhaps 5 meters across, filled with absolute darkness. Not merely an absence of light, but a darkness that seemed to devour light, pulling it in like a black hole. Around the pit, the ancient seals still remained, though broken and crumbling. Stones inscribed with warding symbols lay scattered, and the circle of protection that had once contained the entity was shattered in a dozen places. At the far end of the chamber, hunched over a makeshift desk made from stone slabs, was a body. It was mummified by the dry, cold air, preserved by the same temporal stasis that affected everything in this cursed place. The corpse wore the tattered remains of 1920s clothing. In its desiccated hands was a pen, and before it lay papers covered in frantic handwriting. Karim approached carefully and began to read the papers. They were dated July 1923, written in the same hand as the journal they'd found in the village. "I have made a terrible mistake. The entity lied to us. Or perhaps I simply didn't understand the nature of the bargain. My people are trapped, transformed into something neither living nor dead. But I realized too late that the entity cannot leave this mountain. It is bound here by the ancient seals, even though they are broken. It can only feed through the opening we foolishly widened. I have spent weeks studying the ancient symbols, trying to understand how to undo what I've done. The old ones who first sealed it left instructions, but they are incomplete. To truly seal the entity again requires a sacrifice, a willing soul to serve as the final seal, to bridge the gap between our world and its realm, to hold the door shut from the inside. I cannot ask this of my people. They have already suffered enough because of my mistake, so I will do it myself. I have prepared the ritual. When I complete it, my consciousness will become part of the seal itself, eternal and unchanging. I will hold the threshold closed forever, or until time itself ends. To whoever finds this, if the ritual has failed, if the entity still feeds, then I was not strong enough. But perhaps you can succeed where I failed. The instructions are carved on the walls of this chamber. Study them. Understand them. And if you have the courage, complete what I could not." The papers ended there. The village elder had attempted the ritual, but something had gone wrong. Perhaps his strength had failed at the crucial moment, or perhaps the entity had fought back. Whatever the reason, his sacrifice had been incomplete. The door had been partially closed, limiting the entity's power but not fully sealing it away. "We need to complete the ritual," Youssef said, his voice hollow. "That means someone has to die," Layla said bluntly. "Someone has to willingly sacrifice themselves to become part of the seal." "That's what he's saying." Karim was already examining the walls, photographing the symbols with Layla's analog camera, taking notes frantically. "The ritual is complex," he said. "It requires specific components, something representing life, something representing death, something representing time itself. And most critically, it requires someone who understands both the profane nature of the entity and the sacred duty to contain it. Someone who knows what they're doing and why." "How long do we have?" Youssef asked, though he feared he knew the answer. As if in response, the darkness in the pit stirred. Tendrils of shadow rose from it like smoke, coiling through the air, tasting them, testing them. The temperature dropped further, and frost began to form on their skin. "Not long," Karim said. "It knows we're here. It knows what we're planning. And it's going to try to stop us." The chamber began to change. The walls rippled like water. and through them they could see other times, other places. Visions of the village in its prime, children laughing, markets bustling. Then the mist coming, the screaming, the transformation. Over and over, the same scenes playing out like a loop, the entity's favorite memories, the moment when it had fed most deeply, and mixed in with the visions were projections, futures that might be. The three of them, transformed and faceless, joining the crowd of ghosts. The mist spreading beyond the mountain, consuming the towns below, then cities, then entire regions. The entity growing strong enough to break free of even this mountain, spreading across the world, freezing all of humanity in an eternal moment between life and death. It's showing us what it wants, Layla said. It wants us to give up, to accept transformation. Then we don't give it that satisfaction, Yusef replied, squaring his shoulders. Karim, what do we need for the ritual? According to the instructions carved on the chamber walls and Karim's increasingly frantic translation, the ritual required 3 key components. The living heart, something that contained the essence of life, freely given. The ancient text suggested this meant blood from a willing sacrifice, spilled over the broken seals to restore their power. The dead past, an artifact from those who had died because of the entity, a connection to the lives it had stolen. The village elder's mummified body would serve this purpose, specifically his hand, which had signed the original bargain. The stolen moment, a fragment of the entity's own power, turned against it. This was the most dangerous component to obtain. It meant entering the pit itself, stealing a piece of the entity's essence without being consumed by it. This is insane, Layla said, but she was already rolling up her sleeve. Let's start with the easy part. How much blood do we need? A cup's worth, at least, Karim said. Poured over each of the major seal points. Layla pulled a small knife from her camera bag. She'd brought it for cutting rope and made a careful incision on her forearm. Blood welled up dark and rich. Yusef quickly tied a makeshift bandage around the wound after collecting the blood in a metal canteen cup. The second component was grim but straightforward. Karim approached the elder's body with reverence, muttering a prayer in Arabic. The mummified hand detached easily, too easily. The body had been here for over a century, after all. Karim wrapped the hand in cloth and tucked it into his backpack. But the third component, that was where things became truly dangerous. They stood at the edge of the pit, staring down into the absolute darkness. The temperature here was well below freezing, and their breath formed crystalline clouds that were immediately sucked down into the void. I'll go, Yusef said. No, Layla countered. I'm the lightest. If we're lowering someone down on a rope, it should be me. I'll move faster, use less energy. Assuming we even have a rope, Karim pointed out. They did, barely. So after scrounging through their scattered supplies, they found a climbing rope in Yusef's pack. 20 meters of nylon cord, designed for mountain climbing. They secured one end around a sturdy stalagmite and tested it. It held. Layla took the other end and fashioned a harness around her waist. In her pocket, she placed a small glass vial, originally meant for water samples, which would hold the piece of the entity. How exactly do I collect a fragment of its essence? She asked. Karim consulted his notes. The text says to capture a shadow where light falls, where the entity's form intersects with our reality, at the boundary between worlds. You'll know it when you see it. That's spectacularly unhelpful, Layla muttered, but she was already positioning herself at the edge of the pit. Yusef and Karim gripped the rope, bracing themselves. Layla took a deep breath, aimed her camera's flash down into the darkness, and stepped backward into the void. The descent was unlike anything Layla had experienced. As she sank into the darkness, gravity seemed to become uncertain. One moment she was dropping quickly, the next she was floating, suspended, weightless. The rope above her twisted and writhed as if alive, but she could still feel Yusef and Karim controlling it, lowering her meter by meter. The darkness was absolute. Her flashlight did nothing. The beam simply stopped a few centimeters from the lens, swallowed by the hungry void. But her camera flash, when she triggered it, worked. For split seconds she could see. What she saw defied description. The pit wasn't a pit at all. It was a tear in reality, a wound in the fabric of space-time. Through it, she could glimpse the entity's true form. Not a creature exactly, but a structure. A vast, geometric, impossible architecture made from crystal. Moments. Every stolen second of time from the village was here, preserved and displayed, forming the building blocks of the entity's body. She saw the village elder's last living moment, frozen in crystal. She saw children playing, their laughter captured mid-sound. She saw lovers embracing, farmers harvesting, elders praying. All of them crystallized, stolen, used as food and building material for this impossible being. And in the center of it all, a presence, a consciousness so vast and alien that merely perceiving it made her head pound with agony. It noticed her. It saw her with 1,000,000 stolen eyes. "Are you come to steal from me? How delightfully ironic, I who am the great thief, robbed by a mortal. Shall I let you? Shall I humor your desperate attempt?" The voice was inside her skull, behind her eyes, in her very thoughts. It was all around and within, and she couldn't shut it out. "You fascinate me. Little photographer, you capture moments. Freeze them in time, preserve them. We are not so different. You and I too am a preserver. I collect moments, keep them safe, protect them from the ravages of linear time." "You're a monster," Layla gasped, barely able to form words. "You trap people, torture them, feed on their suffering." "Suffering? They do not suffer. Suffering requires temporal flow. They exist in the perfect moment, unchanging, eternal. Is that not what humanity has always wanted? Escape from death, from decay, from the terrible forward march of entropy?" As the entity spoke, showing her its perspective, Layla almost understood. To an immortal being existing outside of normal time, the crystallization of moments wasn't cruelty. It was salvation. The entity genuinely believed it was helping, preserving, protecting. It simply couldn't comprehend the horror of existence without change, without choice, without the freedom to grow and die and be forgotten. "They didn't choose this," Layla said. "Not really. They were desperate, tricked, manipulated. Choice is an illusion of linear time in my realm. All choices have already been made, are being made, will always be made. I offer them escape from the tyranny of causality." Through the swirling darkness, Layla saw it, a point where the entity's crystalline structure touched the edges of her reality, a place where frozen time met flowing time, where stolen moments brushed against the present. It looked like a fracture in glass, glowing faintly with the blue-green light of compressed existence. She reached out with the vial, extending her arm toward it. The entity could have stopped her, she was certain of that. It was allowing this, curious to see if they could actually complete the ritual, perhaps confident that it wouldn't matter. Her fingers closed around the glowing fracture, and she twisted. Something broke free, not physically but conceptually. A shard of frozen time splintered away from the entity's structure and fell into her vial. She sealed it quickly. The entity's voice changed, losing its philosophical detachment and becoming sharp with something that might have been pain or surprise. "Ah, yes, that. That stings. Well played, little thief. Well played indeed, but know this. Even if you complete your ritual, even if you seal me again, I am patient. Seals erode, mountains crumble. Eventually, I will be free. I have all the time in all the worlds." Layla yanked on the rope. "Pull me up now!" The ceiling. They hauled Layla up frantically, the rope burning their hands even through gloves. When she emerged from the pit, her hair had turned white at the temples and her eyes held a haunted look that would never entirely fade. "Did you get it?" Yusef asked. In response, Layla held up the vial. Inside, the fragment of stolen time glowed and twisted, trying desperately to return to its source. Looking at it too long made their vision blur, time seeming to skip and jump. "We have everything," Karim said, laying out the components. "Now we need to perform the ritual exactly as described. According to the ancient instructions, the ritual had to be performed at the boundary between time stopped and time flowing, which meant on the edge of the pit itself. They had to arrange the broken seals in a specific pattern, anoint them with the living blood, place the dead elder's hand at the center point, and finally, shatter the vial of stolen time to release its energy back into the seal. But there was one more requirement, one they'd all been avoiding thinking about. Someone had to stay behind, to anchor the seal with their living consciousness. Someone had to willingly step into the pit and allow the entity to claim them, not to feed on them, but to be transformed into the lock that would keep it imprisoned. "I'll do it," all three of them said simultaneously. They looked at each other. Yusef spoke first. "This is my responsibility. I'm the one who brought us here, who insisted we investigate this place." Don't be absurd, Karim countered. I'm the researcher. I understood the texts, I know the ritual. It makes sense that I'm the one to complete it. Layla shook her head. You're both idiots. I'm already contaminated. Look at my hair, my eyes. I went into the pit. Part of me is already connected to the entity. I'm the obvious choice. They argued while setting up the ritual components, each trying to convince the others that they should be the sacrifice. It was almost funny. In a dark way, 3 people fighting over who got to die, but in the end there was no contest. Karim had the knowledge. Layla had been touched by the entity. But Youssef had made a promise to himself years ago when he first became a journalist. If his pursuit of a story ever put innocence in danger, he would be the one to pay the price. I'm doing this, he said with finality. And before you argue, Karim, you need to survive to document this, to warn people, to make sure no one else ever comes here. And Layla, you need to live to show the world the truth with your photographs. I'm just a writer. Words are cheap. You two have real proof. It wasn't true words mattered. His work mattered, but it was a good enough lie to give him courage. They worked quickly, knowing that every moment they delayed, the entity grew stronger. The blood was poured over the seal stones, reactivating the ancient wards. The patterns began to glow with the same blue-green light as the stolen time. The elder's mummified hand was placed at the northern point of the seal, completing the connection to the past. Now came the moment of truth. Youssef took the vial from Layla's trembling hands. He stood at the edge of the pit, looking down into the darkness that would become his eternal prison. He thought of his family, whom he'd never see again. He thought of all the stories he'd never write. He thought of all the sunrises he'd never watch and all the coffee he'd never drink and all the laughs he'd never share. Then he thought of the Village 347, people trapped for a century in living death, unable to scream, unable to cry, unable to do anything but feed an insatiable cosmic parasite. His choice was easy. Tell my family I died doing something that mattered, he said to his friends. Then, before they could stop him, he smashed the vial against the stone and stepped into the pit. The entity surged up to meet him, eager, hungry, ready to claim another victim. But Youssef wasn't a victim. He was a volunteer, a sacrifice, and that made all the difference. As the darkness enveloped him, he felt his consciousness expanding, stretching, becoming something more than human. He could see the seal beneath him activating, the ancient wards recognizing the power of a willing sacrifice. The entity tried to consume him, to crystallize his time and add him to its collection. But Youssef resisted. He understood now what the village elder had failed to grasp. The sacrifice wasn't about being consumed. It was about becoming part of the seal itself, about transforming from a person into a guardian, a living barrier between the entity and the world. He pushed back against the entity's overwhelming presence, using his own consciousness as a shield. He felt Karim and Layla above, completing the final parts of the ritual, and he used their life energy as an anchor, a reminder of what he was protecting. The pit began to close. Not physically, it would always be there. A hole in the mountain, a weak point in reality, but metaphysically, conceptually, it was sealing. Youssef's consciousness spread across the gap, becoming a living door, a wall of human will and sacrifice that the entity couldn't breach. The entity raged against him, battering his mind with centuries of experience and alien power. But Youssef held firm. He thought of every story he'd ever written about human courage, every tale of sacrifice and heroism he'd documented. He thought of the village elder who'd tried and failed, and he refused to fail himself. The seal clicked into place. Above, Karim and Layla watched in awe as the pit didn't exactly close, but became less. The darkness was still there, but it was contained, bounded, manageable. The oppressive feeling that had filled the chamber lifted. The temperature began to rise, and from deep in the pit they heard Youssef's voice one last time, faint but clear. It's done. Go. Leave this place. Tell the world. Then silence. Karim and Layla stumbled out of the cave as the first true sunlight in over a century began to pierce the mist. The entity's power was broken, its grip on the mountain loosening. The eternal fog that had surrounded Al-Duha was dispersing, thinning, revealing a sky that was the painful blue of freedom. As they descended the treacherous path back toward the village, they could hear sounds that hadn't echoed in these mountains for 100 years, birds singing, wind rustling through sparse vegetation. the distant rumble of thunder from real, natural clouds. When they reached the village square, they stopped in shock. The statues, those two ribal stone figures frozen in eternal agony, were crumbling, not into dust or rubble, but into something lighter, more ephemeral. As they watched, the stone flesh of the nearest figure began to crack and flake away, revealing not bones or corpse, but light. Pure golden light. One by one the statues disintegrated, each releasing a glowing orb that rose slowly into the morning air. There were hundreds of them, floating like luminous dandelion seeds, drifting upward toward the breaking dawn. Souls, Layla whispered, raising her camera with shaking hands to capture this impossible moment. For their being freed, the orbs rose higher and higher, some drifting toward the peaks of distant mountains, others simply fading into the sunlight. But a few lingered, circling around Karim and Layla in what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Then they too ascended and vanished. Within an hour every stone figure had dissolved. The village square was empty of the haunting sculptures. Those shallow depressions in the cobblestones marked where each had stood, a memorial that would remain long after they were gone. The village itself was changing too. The unnatural preservation that had kept it frozen in 1923 was failing. Wood began to rot at a visible rate. Paint peeled, fabric frayed. Within the span of a morning, Al-Duha aged a century. By noon, when Karim and Layla finally prepared to leave, it looked like what it truly was, a ghost town empty and forgotten, claimed by time and weather as all abandoned places eventually are. They found their car, impossibly, restored to working condition. The rust had vanished, the tires were inflated, the engine turned over smoothly. Perhaps it was Yusef's doing, a final gift from beyond, ensuring his friends could escape the mountain. Or perhaps the entity, in its defeat, had released its grip on all the stolen time, allowing the car to return to its proper temporal state. They didn't question it. They simply got in and drove. The path out of the village was clear now, the mist walls gone completely. The dirt road they'd struggled to navigate in the fog was actually not as treacherous as it had seemed, merely old and unused, but perfectly drivable in daylight. As they descended the mountain, Layla kept looking back, watching Al-Duha shrink behind them until it was just a grey smudge against the mountainside, indistinguishable from the rocks and scree. Just another ruin, just another forgotten place that time had claimed. "We have to report this," she said finally, breaking hours of silence. "We have to tell someone." Karim, who had been driving with mechanical focus, just to have something to do with his hands, shook his head slowly. "Tell them what?" "That we found an interdimensional entity feeding on stolen time. That Yusef sacrificed himself to become a metaphysical seal. They'll think we're insane. They'll think we murdered him and created an elaborate delusion to cover it up. But I have photographs," Layla protested, though her voice was uncertain. She pulled out her analog camera and reviewed the film, her heart sinking as she did. The images were there, the village, the statues, the cave symbols, but they looked mundane in the harsh light of day. Just old ruins, just weathered stones, nothing that couldn't be rationally explained. Even the pictures she'd taken of the ritual chamber, of the pit itself, the darkness in them was just darkness. It didn't convey the cosmic horror, the mind-bending wrongness of what they'd experienced. To an outsider, they were just photographs of a cave. "No one will believe us," Karim said with finality. "And maybe that's for the best. If people knew there was an entity like that trapped in the mountain, even sealed away, there would be expeditions, curiosity seekers, idiots trying to commune with it or study it or harness its power. The seal might be strong now, but every person who approaches it, every mind that touches it, weakens it a little. So we just forget?" Layla asked, though she knew forgetting was impossible. The white in her hair would remind her every day. The haunted look in her eyes would never fade. And Yusef would be with them always, a ghost of their own making. "We remember," Karim corrected. "We carry this. We honor Yusef's sacrifice, and we make sure no one else ever suffers the same fate. We just do it quietly." They reached civilization 3 days later, a small town in the foothills where they checked into a hotel and slept for 16 hours straight, their first real rest since entering the mountain. When they woke, they looked haggard and aged, as if they'd been gone months instead of days. Their phones, which hadn't worked in the mountains, suddenly flooded with messages. Concerned friends and family, Yousef's editor demanding to know where he was, police inquiries about their whereabouts. They'd been reported missing after their car was found abandoned on a mountain road by hikers. The official story they settled on was simple. They'd gotten lost hiking. Yousef had fallen into a crevasse trying to find help, and despite extensive searching, they'd been unable to recover his body. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, far enough from it to protect the secret of Al-Duha. Yousef's family was devastated. Layla and Karim attended the funeral, a hollow ceremony with an empty casket, and stood in the back unable to meet the accusing, questioning eyes of his mother. How could they explain that her son hadn't died but had transcended, that he existed now in a state beyond death, forever standing guard against an cosmic horror? They couldn't, so they stayed silent and let themselves be seen as the survivors who'd failed to save their friend. In the months that followed, both of them tried to return to normal life. Layla went back to her photography, but found she couldn't shoot anything. Every image she captured felt flat, lifeless, lacking the terrible vitality of those last photographs from the mountain. She'd seen too much. Normal reality seemed pale and thin by comparison. Karim returned to his research, but he couldn't focus on the mundane historical questions that had once fascinated him. Who cared about trade routes and tax records when he knew that reality was far stranger and more terrible than anyone imagined? He began instead to research other disappearances, other strange places, looking for patterns, looking for signs of other entities like the one in Al-Duha. He found the 6 months after their return from the mountain, Karim showed up at Layla's apartment unannounced, carrying a battered briefcase full of documents. "I think there are others," he said without preamble, spreading papers across her kitchen table. "Not identical, but similar. Places where time acts strangely, where people vanish, where the boundaries between our world and something else grow thin." Layla, who'd been surviving on coffee and sleeping pills, forcing herself through each empty day, felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, but purpose. "Reason to keep going. Show me," she said. Karim's research was extensive and disturbing. He'd found 17 locations worldwide with similar characteristics to Al-Duha. Isolated places, often mountainous or in deep forests, where mysterious disappearances clustered. Places with strange weather patterns, temporal anomalies and local legends about never entering certain areas. "There's a forest in Romania," he said, pointing to a map dotted with red marks. "Hoia Baciu, known for paranormal activity, temporal distortions, perfect circles where nothing grows. There's an island off Japan where an entire fishing village vanished overnight in 1943. There's a valley in Peru where compasses don't work and people report seeing themselves from other times." "You think these are all like Al-Duha?" Layla asked. "All entities like the Threshold Keeper?" "Maybe not identical," Karim hedged, "but similar. Things that exist in the spaces between. Things that feed on time, on consciousness, on the gap between existence and non-existence. The entity in Al-Duha told you it was ancient, when the mountains were young. What if there are others? What if they've been here all along in the forgotten places, the liminal spaces?" It was a terrifying thought, but also strangely a freeing one, because if there were other entities, then there might be other seals that needed maintenance, other sacrifices that had been made, other people like Yousef, standing eternal guard against horrors from beyond. They weren't alone in their knowledge. The secret was bigger than they'd thought, deeper, older. And maybe, just maybe, there were others who knew, who remembered, who stood watch. "We can't seal all of them," Layla said pragmatically. "Even if we wanted to, we don't have the resources, the knowledge, or frankly, the lifespan." "No," Karim agreed. "But we can watch. We can warn. We can make sure that when people go missing in these places, it's not just dismissed as accidents or animal attacks. We can be the keepers of the knowledge, the witnesses who remember when everyone else forgets." "A secret society?" Layla almost laughed. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious." Karim pulled out another document, a piece of parchment so old it was nearly transparent. "I found this in the archives of the Ottoman Library. It's a letter from 1453, written by a scholar who was studying ancient Greek texts. He describes an organization called the Heirs of the Seal, people who knew about the threshold entities and dedicated their lives to maintaining the ancient bindings." that kept them imprisoned. He pointed to a symbol at the bottom of the letter, a circle with a line through it, bisected by a vertical bar, the same symbol they'd seen carved around the cave entrance in Al-Duha. The organization might not exist anymore, Karim continued. Or maybe it does and we just haven't found them yet. But either way, we could restart. You and me, we could be the new heirs of the seal. We could track these places, monitor them, make sure the entities stay contained. And if a seal breaks? Layla asked. If another entity starts to break free? Karim met her eyes. Then we do what Youssef did. We sacrifice whatever is necessary to keep the world safe. It was a grim vow, a terrible burden to take on. But looking at Karim's determined face, thinking of Youssef standing eternal watch in the mountain, Layla found herself nodding. Okay, she said. Let's be the heirs of the seal. Let's make sure Youssef's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Their first real test came faster than they'd expected. 3 months into their research, Karim received a panicked call from a colleague in Indonesia. A team of geologists had gone missing near a crater lake in Sumatra, a place locally known as the Mirror of Lost Moments. The last transmission from the team mentioned strange fog and a sense of time moving incorrectly. Karim and Layla were on a plane within 24 hours. The crater lake, when they reached it after 2 days of hiking through dense jungle, was eerily beautiful, perfectly circular, filled with water so still it really did look like a mirror, reflecting the sky with impossible clarity. But as they approached, they felt it, that same temporal distortion they'd experienced in Al-Duha. The air felt thick, resistant, as if they were moving through something more viscous than atmosphere. There's an entity here, Layla said with certainty, smaller than the Threshold Keeper, maybe weaker but definitely present. They found the geologists' camp abandoned but not destroyed. Tents stood intact, equipment was still running. It was as if the team had simply stepped away for a moment. Except the calendar in the main tent showed a date 3 weeks earlier than it should have, and the food supplies had decayed, as if they'd been there for months. Time dilation, Karim murmured. The entity here doesn't steal time like the Threshold Keeper did. It distorts it, stretches it, compresses it, makes it unreliable. They spent 2 days studying the site, taking careful measurements, photographs and notes. Layla set up cameras on timers, calibrated against atomic clocks she'd brought specifically for this purpose. The results were conclusive. Time around the lake ran at different speeds depending on proximity to the water. At the shore, 1 hour could pass, while only minutes passed further away. Or vice versa. The geologists probably didn't realize what was happening, Karim theorized. They set up camp, started their work, and by the time they noticed something was wrong, they'd been caught in the distortion field. They might think they've only been here for a few days when weeks or months have passed in the outside world. Can we get them out? Layla asked. Karim studied his notes. The entity here isn't sealed. It's been free for, I don't know, possibly millennia, but it's also not actively malicious like the Threshold Keeper was. It's just existing, doing what it does. The danger is incidental, not intentional. They searched for 3 more days, carefully mapping the temporal distortion fields, looking for areas of stability where the missing geologists might have taken refuge. And finally, on the evening of the 5th day, they found them. The geologists were huddled in a cave on the far side of the lake, exhausted, terrified, and convinced they'd been there for months. In reality, only 11 days had passed since their disappearance, but for them, subjectively, it had been 3 times that long. They'd aged visibly, their hair grown out, beards scraggly, bodies thin from rationed food supplies. Getting them out was a careful process of navigating the temporal fields, always staying in zones where time flowed normally, or near normally. It took an entire day to make a journey that should have taken 30 minutes. When they finally reached safety, back at the trailhead where local search and rescue had set up a base camp, the geologists were rushed to a hospital. Karim and Layla gave their statements to the authorities, carefully edited versions that mentioned unusual magnetic fields and disorientation, but nothing about temporal distortion or entities from beyond reality. As they flew home, exhausted but satisfied, Layla turned to Karim. "We can't seal every entity," she said. "Some of them are too old, too established, too powerful. The best we can do is understand them, map them, warn people to stay away." "I know," Karim replied. But at least we're doing something. We're the Watchers now. We're the ones who remember. And if another entity like the Threshold Keeper emerges, if another seal breaks, we'll be ready. Ready to sacrifice ourselves? Layla asked quietly. If necessary, Karim said. That's what it means to be an heir of the seal. That's what Yusef taught us. The small apartment in Istanbul that served as their headquarters was crammed with research. Maps covered every wall, red pins marking sites of interest, string connecting locations in patterns that might have looked like madness to an outsider, but made perfect, terrible sense to Karim and Layla. They'd investigated 11 sites in 2 years. Some were minor, weak spots in reality where strange things happened but no major entity lurked. Others were more serious, requiring careful documentation and warning signs discreetly placed to deter unwary travelers. They'd also found something else. Other people who knew. The heirs of the seal weren't entirely gone. They were scattered, disconnected, many unaware that others like them existed. A monk in Tibet who guarded a portal in a mountain monastery. A ranger in Yellowstone who'd spent 30 years keeping hikers away from a particular valley. A fisherman in the Philippines who knew which waters to avoid and why. One by one, Karim and Layla were finding these solitary watchers and bringing them together, creating a network. Not quite an organization, too loose, too informal for that, but at least a community. People who could share information, warn each other of new developments and provide backup when needed. Tonight, they were hosting a gathering of 6 such watchers in their cramped apartment. Ages ranged from 25 to 70, nationalities from American to Chinese to Brazilian, but they all shared the same haunted look, the same sense of carrying terrible knowledge that they could never share with the wider world. The pattern is accelerating, said Dr. Margaret Chen, a physicist from Berkeley who'd accidentally discovered a stable time loop in a condemned building. I've been tracking the data. Incidents are increasing, not just in number but in severity. It's as if the boundaries between our world and theirs are weakening. Climate change? Suggested Rafael, the Filipino fisherman. I've seen it in my waters. The warming oceans are releasing things that should have stayed buried. Ancient cold spots, where the catch always spoiled faster than it should. They're growing, spreading. Or maybe it's us, offered Yuki, the Yellowstone ranger. 7 billion people, all with smartphones, all broadcasting our existence, our consciousness, our time and attention. Maybe we're drawing them to us, making ourselves irresistible to entities that feed on human experience. Karim listened to all of this, making notes. Every theory mattered. Every observation could be crucial. But what worried him most was something else. Something he'd noticed in the data, but hadn't yet shared with the group. There's a pattern within the pattern, he said finally, standing to point at the map. Look at this. 3 years ago, incidents were scattered randomly across the globe. But now if you plot them chronologically, he drew lines connecting the pins. They're moving, converging, all heading in roughly the same direction. The group fell silent following the lines. They all converged on a single point, a remote region in eastern Siberia. What's there? Layla asked, though she already suspected the answer. I don't know, Karim admitted. The region is so remote that even satellite imagery is limited. But according to local legends, it's called the Valley of Silence, a place where even in summer ice never melts, where compasses spin uselessly, where planes avoid flying overhead because instruments fail. Another entity? Margaret asked. Possibly, or... Karim hesitated, then continued. Or something bigger. What if all these entities we've been tracking, all these threshold beings, they're not independent? What if they're connected somehow, parts of a larger whole? And what if that larger whole is waking up? The implications of that were too terrifying to contemplate. The Threshold Keeper of Al-Duha had been powerful enough to hold an entire village hostage for a century. If that was just a small piece of something larger, we need to investigate, Layla said, though her voice shook slightly. If this Valley of Silence is the source or the center or whatever it is, we need to know about it. That could be a death sentence, Yuki pointed out bluntly. If the Threshold Keeper took 3 people and a heroic sacrifice to seal, what would something 100 times more powerful require? Maybe nothing, Margaret said thoughtfully. Maybe it doesn't need to be sealed. Maybe it just needs to be understood. My time loop in Berkeley, once I figured out the mechanism, I was able to work around it. It still exists, but it's no longer dangerous because I understand its rules. Or maybe understanding it is exactly what it wants, Raphael countered. Maybe that's how it spreads through knowledge, through people studying it and thinking about it and giving it their attention. They argued for hours, weighing risks and options, but in the end, they all knew there was no real choice. Someone had to go to the Valley of Silence. Someone had to investigate, because the alternative, waiting for whatever Ver was there to fully wake up, was unthinkable. I'll go, Karim said. This is my research, my discovery. I have to see it through. We'll go together, Layla corrected, like we did in Al-Duha. We started this together. We'll finish it together. The other watchers offered to come too, but Karim refused. No, he said firmly. We need you all to keep monitoring your regions. If this goes wrong, if Layla and I don't come back, you'll need to warn the world. Whatever way you can, whatever it takes. The knowledge can't die with us. Into Siberia, getting to the Valley of Silence was an adventure in itself. First, a flight to Yakutsk, one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth. Then a helicopter ride to a remote research station. And finally, a 5-day trek on snowmobiles across frozen tundra that hadn't changed since the last ice age. They hired local guides, brothers named Dmitri and Alexei, who knew the region better than anyone. When Karim mentioned their destination, both men's faces went pale. The Valley of Silence? Dmitri asked. You want to go there? Yes, Layla confirmed. Is that a problem? Alexei shook his head. We'll take you close. Very close, but not into the valley itself. No amount of money could make us enter that place. Why? Karim asked. What's there? The brothers exchanged looks. Finally, Dmitri spoke. Grandfather told us stories. His grandfather told him. Going back generations. The valley is cursed, they say. Not cursed by spirits or demons that we could understand, but cursed by something older. Something that was there before the earth was cold, before the ice came. Something that sleeps but never dies. Sounds like a lot of local superstition, Layla said, though without much conviction. She'd learned to respect local legends. They were often garbled, exaggerated, but at their core was usually a truth. Perhaps, Dmitri allowed. But superstition or not, people who enter the valley don't come out. Not ever. We have a saying. The valley remembers everyone who enters and it never lets them forget. What does that mean? Karim asked. Alexei shrugged. We don't know, but we know enough to stay away. They reached the edge of the Valley of Silence on a grey afternoon when the sun hung low in the sky, barely clearing the horizon even at its zenith. The valley itself was vast, perhaps 20 kilometers across, surrounded by low, rounded hills that looked ancient even by geological standards. From their vantage point on the rim, they could see down into the valley. It was exactly as described, ice and snow that never melted, even where the weak sunlight struck. But more than that, it was dark. Not from shadow or lack of light, but from something inherent. The snow itself was grey, as if absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and there was no sound. Absolutely none. The wind that whistled across the tundra stopped abruptly at the valley's edge, as if encountering an invisible wall. No birds flew overhead. No insects buzzed. Even their own voices seemed muffled, absorbed, stolen by the valley itself. This is where we leave you, Dmitri said, already backing away. We'll wait here for 5 days. If you're not back by then, we return to Yakutsk and report you missing. That's the deal. Karim and Layla didn't argue. They understood. They made their camp on the rim, and as the brothers drove away on their snowmobiles, they prepared themselves for the descent. The walk down into the valley should have taken an hour. It took 6. Not because of difficult terrain, the slope was gentle, the snow firm beneath their boots, but because every step they took seemed to be through something more than space. They were walking through time itself, through memory, through layers of existence that shouldn't have been traversable on foot. Layla felt it first. Do you feel like we're being watched? She asked, constantly looking over her shoulder. No, Karim replied. Worse, I feel like we're being remembered. Like the valley is reviewing us, examining us, cataloguing every moment of our existence. He was right. With each step deeper into the valley, they began to experience memories, but not their own memories. Memories of this place. Layla saw a group of people dressed in furs and carrying stone tools, crossing the valley. Neolithic hunters, perhaps 10,000 years old. She saw their faces, felt their fear as they realized they'd entered a place they shouldn't have, watched as they were slowly erased, not killed but forgotten, removed from the timeline as if they'd never existed. Karim saw soldiers, Mongol warriors from the medieval period, Russian explorers from the 18th century, a Soviet research team from the 1960s, all entering the valley, all vanishing, all leaving nothing behind but the valley's memory of them. It's not killing them, Karim realized. It's doing something worse. It's unmaking them, erasing them from existence backwards through time until they never were at all. Can we be erased? Layla asked, terror making her voice small. I don't know, maybe. Probably, but we're aware of it, and that might make a difference. Every other group that came here, they didn't know what they were walking into. We do. We've been touched by the threshold entities before. Maybe that gives us some immunity. It was a hope, nothing more. But hope was all they had. At the center of the valley, they found the source. It wasn't a cave or a fountain or any kind of physical structure. It was a place, a position, a point in space where reality was thinner than it should be, where the membrane between worlds was worn to transparency. Looking at it, really looking at it, with their minds open to what they'd learned, they could see through. And what lay on the other side defied description. It was a void, yes, but not an empty one. It was a fullness of nothing, a plenum of absence, a space so utterly devoid of anything that it became something in itself. And in that void, structures existed. Geometries that hurt to perceive, architectures of antimatter and negative time and probability, collapsed into impossibility. The entities, all of them everywhere across the world, were appendages reaching through from that void. Fingers pressing against the fabric of reality, poking through weak spots, feeding on whatever they could reach. But this place, the Valley of Silence, was different. This was where the largest breach existed. This was where the body of the thing was closest to breaking through. Dear God, Karim whispered. It's not waking up. It's being born. They made camp, if it could be called that, next to the breach. They were beyond fear now, beyond the instinct for self-preservation. They needed to understand, to document, to learn whatever they could before the valley decided to erase them from existence. Layla set up cameras, though she wasn't sure they'd work. Karim took notes in a journal, writing frantically, trying to capture in words what they were experiencing. The breach pulsed. Not visibly, it didn't move in space, but temporally. It flickered through moments, existing in multiple times simultaneously. They could see it as it had been 1,000 years ago. Smaller, barely a pinprick, as it was now perhaps 2 meters across, and as it would be in the future, vast, world-consuming, inevitable. It's growing, Layla said, slowly but steadily. In another few hundred years, maybe less, it'll be big enough for the entity to pass through completely. Not entity, Karim corrected, still writing. Entities, plural. This isn't one thing, it's thousands, millions, an entire ecosystem of beings that exist in the void between possibilities. The threshold beings we've encountered, they're scouts, minor protrusions, tiny pieces of a much larger whole. When the breach widens enough, they'll all come through, not to invade, not to attack, but simply to exist. And our reality, our universe, isn't big enough for both us and them. So what do we do? Layla asked. We can't seal this. Even with 1,000 sacrifices, 1,000,000 Yusefs standing guard, this breach is too big, too old, too established. Karim stopped writing. No, we can't seal it. But maybe we can shrink it. Maybe we can undo the damage. How? The same way any wound heals. By removing the foreign object that keeps it open. By finding whatever initially tore reality here and, I don't know, taking it away, destroying it, something. They spent the next day, or what passed for a day, in the Valley of Silence exploring. The valley was large, but its secrets were surprisingly close to the breach. They found the ruins of an ancient structure, predating any known human civilization. Not a temple exactly, but a machine of sorts, carved from a single massive block of meteorite iron. The machine was inactive now, covered in frost and worn by ages. But traces of its purpose remained in the carvings that covered its surface. Karim studied them with growing understanding and horror. It's a beacon, he said finally. Someone, somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, built this to call out into the void, to signal to whatever lived there that life existed here, in this universe. An invitation. Why would anyone do that? Layla asked. Curiosity, hubris, a desire for knowledge or power? The same reasons people always do stupid, dangerous things. They didn't understand what they were calling. They thought they were reaching out to gods or aliens or some higher form of intelligence. Instead, they opened a door to something that should never have known we existed. Can we destroy it? Layla asked. The machine, I mean. If we destroy the beacon, will the breach stop growing? Maybe. Probably not entirely, it's been open too long, but it might slow down the growth. Buy time. Centuries, maybe millennia. Long enough for humanity to advance, to find better solutions, to evolve beyond the entity's ability to erase us. They had brought explosives, small charges, intended for extreme emergencies. This qualified. They placed the charges carefully around the base of the ancient machine, setting timers to give themselves enough time to reach the valley's edge before detonation. But as Karim was arming the last charge, they heard it. You understand. Good understanding makes the transition easier. The voice came from the breach, from the void beyond it, from everywhere and nowhere. Not the Threshold Keeper's voice. This was different, larger, more diffuse. It was the voice of the collective entity, the whole vast ecosystem of Threshold beings speaking as one. We do not hate you. We do not wish you harm. We simply are. And we need space to be. Your universe is vast but finite. Ours is infinite but compressed. When we expand into your space, you will be gently displaced, preserved in the gaps between moments, treasured as memories of what once was. We don't want to be memories, Layla shouted at the void. We want to exist, to live and die and change and grow. Change is suffering. Growth is pain. Death is loss. We offer you escape from all of that. Perfect preservation in the eternal now. We've heard this before, Karim said, standing. From the Threshold Keeper, from the entities we've encountered. You offer eternity, but it's a prison. An end to stories, to possibility, to the future itself. The future is overrated. It brings only entropy and decay. We offer something better. You offer oblivion, Layla countered. Dressed up in pretty words, but oblivion all the same. The void pulsed, and for a moment they felt its full attention on them. It was like being examined by a microscope made of compressed eternities. Every moment of their lives reviewed and judged and found curious. You are the ones who sealed our scout, the ones who disrupted the village feeding station. You are interesting most. Humans don't understand enough to oppose. Us, they simply accept or flee or are erased, but you fight. How quaint, how futile, how admirable. Will you stop us? Karim asked, his hand on the detonator. If we destroy the beacon, will you prevent us? No, we are curious to see if it will matter. The breach has existed for 30,000 years. It has its own momentum now. Destroying. The beacon is like plugging a hole in a dam that is already cracking. It might slow the inevitable, but cannot prevent it. So go ahead, destroy it. Buy your species a few more centuries of delusion. We can wait. We have forever. The presence withdrew. The valley returned to its terrible silence. Do it anyway, Layla said. Even if it only buys time, that's all we can do. Buy time, hold the line, pass on the knowledge. Maybe the humans of the future will find a better solution. Karim nodded. He pressed the detonator. The explosion was anticlimactic. A series of muffled thumps, the ancient machine cracking and crumbling. Pieces of meteorite iron scattered across the grey snow. But as it fell, they felt something change. The breach flickered, stuttered, became momentarily smaller before stabilizing again. It had worked. Not much, not enough to close the breach entirely, but enough to slow its growth. Instead of hundreds of years, humanity now had thousands. A temporary reprieve, but reprieve nonetheless. They ran. The valley tried to erase them as they fled. They felt reality unwriting itself around them, their own memories beginning to fragment and fade. But they'd been exposed to threshold entities before. They'd developed a resistance, a mental framework that could hold on to existence even when the universe forgot them. They reached the rim of the valley as the sun was setting, exhausted and hypothermic but alive. Behind them, the Valley of Silence looked the same as ever, ancient and patient and eternal. Dmitri and Alexei were waiting with the snowmobiles, their faces shocked. You came back, Dmitri said. You actually came back. No one has ever, we know, Layla interrupted. And you need to spread the word. No one under any circumstances should ever enter that valley again. Not scientists, not explorers, not anyone. It's too dangerous. What's down there? Alexei asked. The end of the world, Karim replied. Delayed but not prevented. The end of everything, given enough time. The headquarters of the heirs of the seal had expanded. No longer a cramped apartment in Istanbul, they now had a small office building in Geneva, funded by anonymous donations from wealthy individuals who'd had their own encounters with the threshold entities and understood the importance of the work. 37 members now, scattered across 23 countries. Some were full-time watchers, dedicated to monitoring specific sites. Others were part-time, balancing normal lives with the secret knowledge they carried. All of them were bound by the same oath: to watch, to warn, to protect, and if necessary, to sacrifice. Karim stood at a wall-sized map, updating pins and strings. Red for active sites requiring constant monitoring. Yellow for dormant sites that showed signs of awakening. Green for successfully sealed sites that were stable. And black for sites that had been lost, where the entities had broken through and established permanent footholds. There were 3 black pins now. 3 places on Earth where reality had failed, where the void had won, where no human could safely enter. Small areas, isolated, contained, for now. But like cancers, they could metastasize if left unchecked. Layla entered the office carrying coffee and bad news. Margaret's time loop in Berkeley expanded, she said without preamble. It's now affecting a 3-block radius instead of 1 building. We've had to evacuate the area, claim there's a gas leak. But we can't keep that up forever. Karim rubbed his tired eyes. He was 47 now, but looked 60. The stress, the knowledge, the constant vigilance, it aged a person faster than time alone could. Can she seal it? She's trying. But it's different from the others. It's not feeding on people or time directly. It's just looping, playing the same 3 hours over and over again. People caught in it don't even realize it's happening. They just live the same moments endlessly, like a skipping record. So they're trapped, Karim said, like the villagers of Al-Duha, frozen in eternal repetition. Yes, Margaret says she can collapse the loop, but it requires someone to stay inside as an anchor point, someone who remains conscious through the repetitions and can hold on to linear time while everything around them loops. Another sacrifice, Karim said bitterly. They'd lost 4 members that way in 5 years. Good people, brave people, who'd willingly stepped into various traps to seal them. The heirs of the seal had become an organization of martyrs. She's volunteering, Layla said quietly. She says it's her loop, her responsibility. And she's the only physicist among us who really understands what's happening on a quantum level. Has she said goodbye to her family? She doesn't have family. Just us. Karim felt a wave of sorrow wash over him. This was the cost of the work. Not just death, but isolation. Anyone who knew the truth found it harder and harder to maintain relationships with people who didn't. How could you talk about normal concerns when you knew about the void between moments, the entities waiting to erase humanity, the slow creeping doom that lurked at the edges of reality? Approve it, he said finally. But document everything. If her solution works, maybe we can use it on other time loops without requiring more sacrifices. Layla nodded and left. Karim returned to his map, his endless vigil, his Sisyphean task of holding back the tide. A young woman entered, Amira, one of their newest recruits. She'd had an encounter with a threshold entity in Cairo, been saved by one of the heirs, and immediately volunteered to join. She had that look all new members had, eager, determined, not yet worn down by the weight of impossible knowledge. "Sir," she said, "we've received reports from our watcher in Antarctica. The research station near the Ross Ice Shelf is reporting temporal anomalies. Equipment that's been there for months reads as brand new. Food supplies are spoiling backwards, rotted meat becoming fresh overnight. Another breach?" Karim asked, possibly. Or maybe something coming through the Valley of Silence breach is reaching this far. The entities are connected somehow, we know that. If one is strengthening, others might follow. Karim made a decision. "I'll go. Layla can manage here. And I need—" He paused, unable to articulate what he needed. A break? No, there were no breaks from this work. A change of scenery? A chance to feel like he was doing something concrete, instead of just managing the slow decay of reality. "You need to see it for yourself," Amira finished for him. "Understand? I'll arrange the Tre Antarctica was alien. even without threshold entities. The vast emptiness, the crushing cold, the sense of being at the bottom of the world where normal rules didn't apply. It prepared the mind for encountering the impossible. The research station, a cluster of prefabricated buildings on stilts, above the ice, was staffed by 20 scientists from various nations. When Karim arrived, claiming to be from an international safety commission investigating the anomalies, they welcomed him desperately. It started 3 weeks ago, explained Dr. Sarah Johnson, the station commander. Small things at first. A pen that wouldn't run out of ink. Coffee that never got cold. We thought it was funny, some kind of localized physics quirk. But then it got worse. She showed him to the laboratory. Inside, a technician was conducting an experiment that made Karim's skin crawl. A plant in a pot was simultaneously flowering and seeding and dying and returning to a seedling, cycling through its entire lifespan in minutes. Over and over, we can't kill it, the technician explained. We've tried cutting it, burning it, freezing. IT. It just returns to an earlier state and continues the loop, and now other things are starting to loop too. Yesterday, Jenkins swore he had the same conversation with me 3 times, though I only remember once. You need to evacuate, Karim said immediately. Everyone. Now, this isn't a safety issue, it's an existential one. Evacuate? Dr. Johnson looked incredulous. We're in the middle of critical research here. We can't just— Yes, you can and you will, Karim interrupted. I have the authority to shut this station down. And if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure every government funding this place knows exactly how dangerous it's become. It took 2 days to organize the evacuation. 2 days during which more loops appeared. A clock that ran backwards and forwards simultaneously. A window that showed yesterday's weather. A door that opened into rooms that had existed in previous configurations of the station. The day before the last transport plane was due to leave, Karim went for a walk on the ice. He needed to find the source, the breach point, the place where reality was thinnest. He'd become sensitive to these places after years of exposure. He could feel them the way some people felt, barometric pressure changes before a storm. He found it 3 kilometers from the station, a perfectly circular hole in the ice, about 5 meters across, descending into darkness. But it wasn't deep. His flashlight beam hit bottom after only a few meters. What was at the bottom made him gasp. It was ice, yes, but frozen in the ice was a figure, human-shaped but not human. Too thin, too angular, wrong proportions. It wore no clothes, needed none, because its body was made of the same stuff as the threshold entities, crystallized moments, frozen time, compressed possibility. The first one, Karim breathed. One of the original threshold entities that came through the Valley of Silence breach. It made it this far south before the cold froze it. And now it's waking up. As if hearing his words, the figure's eyes opened. Not physical eyes, just the concept of seeing, of attention, of awareness focusing outward from the ice. So cold. So trapped. So patient. Free me. The thoughts pressed into Karim's mind, making his head throb. No, he said aloud. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't exist in our universe. But I do exist. I am. And I am so very, very cold. I just want to warm up. To grow, to expand. To become. Is that so wrong? Yes, Karim said firmly. Because your becoming means our ending. We can't coexist. There isn't room for both us and you. Then one of us must give way. You are small and finite. I am infinite and patient. The mathematics favor me. Karim pulled out his satellite phone and called the station. I need explosives. Everything you have. And everyone needs to be on the plane within the hour. No arguments, no delays. Do it now. The explosion shattered the ice for hundreds of meters in every direction, creating a new crevasse that swallowed the frozen entity and sealed it under tons of collapsed ice. It wouldn't kill the thing. Karim wasn't even sure such entities could be killed, but it would buy time, maybe decades, maybe longer, before it could dig itself free. Karim watched from the departing plane as the blast cloud rose into the Antarctic sky. Another temporary solution, another delay, another reprieve bought with careful preparation and desperate action. When he returned to Geneva, he found the headquarters in turmoil. Margaret had successfully collapsed the Berkeley time loop, but at a cost. She was now trapped in a single looping moment. Her consciousness spread across infinite repetitions of the same instant. She was alive, aware, but experiencing that one moment over and over forever. She's conscious, Layla explained, her voice breaking. We can communicate with her through the loop, but only for that one instant when the repetition resets. She says she's okay, that she can handle it, that the meditation techniques she learned help her maintain her sense of self. But she's trapped, Karim. We did this to her. She volunteered, Karim said, but the words felt hollow. She knew what she was doing. Does that make it better? Layla demanded. We're no better than the entities, trapping people in eternal moments. The only difference is we tell ourselves it's for a good cause. Karim had no answer to that. The years continued to pass. More members joined the heirs of the seal. More sacrifices were made. More breaches were delayed, contained, managed, but never truly sealed, never truly stopped. All they were doing was buying time, and time was the one resource they could never have enough of. 10 years after their original journey, Karim and Layla decided to return to where it all began. They needed to see if Yusef's sacrifice had held, if the seal on the Threshold Keeper remained strong. The mountain road was easier now. They'd arranged for it to be maintained, part of a network of access routes to various sites the heirs monitored. But as they climbed into the mist-shrouded peaks, Karim felt the old dread returning. Some fears never faded. They just waited patiently for the chance to resurface. The village of Al-Duha had changed. The century of decay that had been accelerated during their first visit had continued naturally. Most buildings had collapsed. The village square was overgrown with hardy mountain plants. The fountain, the feeding aperture for the Threshold Keeper, was cracked and dry, filled with fallen leaves. But the seal held. They could feel it. A presence that was both Yusef and not Yusef. A consciousness that had transcended individuality to become something else. A guardian, eternal and unchanging, standing watch over the imprisoned entity. Is he aware? Layla asked quietly. Does he know we're here? As if in answer, a breeze stirred, impossible in this windless place. And on that breeze came a whisper, barely audible. I see you, old friends. I remember you. Thank you for coming back. Tears streamed down Layla's face. Yusef, can you hear us? Are you okay? The breeze stirred again. I am beyond okay, beyond suffering. I exist in the space between, holding the door closed. It is lonely, yes, but it is meaningful. My sacrifice was not in vain. The Threshold Keeper remains sealed, and I have learned such things, experienced such perspectives. I have seen time from outside time, consciousness from beyond consciousness. I have become something new. Can we free you? Karim asked. Is there any way to release you from this duty? No, and I would not wish it even if there were. This is my purpose now, my existence. I am the seal, the lock, the barrier. Without me, the Threshold Keeper breaks free. And I have come to understand it. This entity that I contain, it is not evil, merely hungry. Not malicious, merely incomprehensible. We have reached, not friendship, but understanding. We coexist in tension, like muscles opposing each other, creating stability through mutual pressure. We have others now, Layla said. Others like you, standing guard over other breaches. An organization dedicated to watching, to maintaining the seals, to holding the line against the void. Good, that is good. Because the breaches are spreading, aren't they? I can feel it, even from here. The Valley of Silence pulse grows stronger. The entities grow bolder. The end approaches, slowly but inexorably. What can we do? Karim asked desperately. How do we stop it permanently? You can't. No one can. The entities are entropy, the heat death of the universe given form and consciousness. They are inevitable. But inevitable doesn't mean immediate. You can delay. You can fight. You can ensure that humanity has time to evolve, to transcend, to become something capable of existing alongside the entities rather than being consumed by them. That is your purpose, as maintaining this seal is mine. We are all guardians of the threshold in our own way. They stayed for 3 days in Al-Duha, camping in the ruins, talking to Yusef's presence when it manifested. He told them of the strange vistas he saw from his position between worlds, of the architecture of impossible geometries, of the thoughts of beings that existed outside of causality, and he told them something else, how to create better seals. The ritual they'd used in Al-Duha was ancient and crude, but Yusef, with his unique perspective from inside the seal itself, had learned better methods. Techniques that could create containment with less suffering That could possibly even eventually create seals without requiring human sacrifice. Karim wrote it all down, page after page of instructions, diagrams, theoretical frameworks. This knowledge, this was what they'd come for. This was how they could improve, how they could make the work of the heirs of the seal more effective and less costly. "Thank you," Karim said as they prepared to leave. "For everything. For your sacrifice, your guidance, your continued watch. Thank you for remembering me," Yusef's voice whispered. "For not letting my sacrifice become meaningless. For carrying on the work. That is all any of us can ask. To be remembered and to know our suffering had purpose." Armed with Yusef's new techniques, the heirs of the seal began to turn the tide. Not winning, they could never truly win, but managing the threat more.